Hello and welcome to the Game Mess Game Club for April of 2023, going up May the 4th. Hey, May the 4th be with all of you. In celebration of Star Wars Day, we have played Star Wars The Force Unleashed, a variety of different versions, not just one. Some of us played the PC 360 PS3 version, some of us played the Wii PS2 PSP version, which is also the Switch version if you're out of the loop. And then one of us played the Nintendo DS version because Beef Hammer is just crazy like that. Today, I have assembled a variety of people from the community who have also played the game, except for someone who usually leads these things who's asleep. I think maybe we'll find out later after I get this edited down. But anyways, how you doing tonight, everyone? You good?
Yeah, I mean,
Great.
I'm not playing Star Wars: The Force Unleashed anymore, so things could be worse.
Starting strong.
I'm doing it. I'm just doing it because it bothers people. It's funny.
It's the bit.
It wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I'm doing well, but I haven't actually beat the game, or I haven't played much of it. But I just wanted to listen in, and also had a few questions about the game.
Fair enough. Well, we can probably answer them for you since I think not. Did all of us finish the game?
Yeah, I beat the game.
Yeah,
As
I
did
also
I.
beat the game. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You're all ahead of me because I did not. For what's worth, before the pitchforks come out in the comments section, I did watch Mike's stream of it at the very least, so I am familiar with what happens throughout the game. Well, let's get these things started like we usually do with how everyone got introduced to the game, and I'll go first. I remember this game back as a kid being a Wii game. Obviously, it's on many more platforms than that, but I definitely remember my friends having it. I was a little younger at the time, and so we definitely all had Wii wiggle waggle horse crap on the mind when playing this game. So we were very enamored by the thought of swinging a lightsaber around, using the Force with our hands and everything like that. And so I played it at a friend's house. That's what I remember it best for. And I didn't really think too much about the 360 PS3 version until significantly later. And then I didn't even know it was a completely different version until relatively recently. Not for this discussion, but elsewhere I learned that. Kind of surprised, but not too much, because it was kind of the time to have a split development there, where you have almost like the Sonic Unleashed formula, where you have the big budget game on the PC, 360, PS3, and then the PS2 Wii version. So I'm wondering, we can just go down the line here. Why don't we do it alphabetically? I think that's the best way to do this first, with starting with Dugan there. How did you first come across The Force Unleashed?
Yeah, a really good marketing campaign is how I came across it. It was, I remember just being shown, oh, do you want to use crazy physics with the Force and stab stormtroopers in midair? Like, yeah, that sounds kind of fun. That sounds like exactly where I was at the age I was at. So I remember the 360 version is the one I originally came in contact with. And yeah, the game looked like a lot of fun. I picked it up and the physics worked. That's what makes it such silly fun. And there was a story, I missed it with all the Star Wars flashiness around me.
Yeah.
But that's how I remember coming to it.
All right, cool. Inefe?
So I picked up this game, I think it was back in college when it first came out. I remember being pretty excited for all the crazy physics stuff, because that was kind of around the time, everybody was getting into, like, look at all the weird physics things you can do, and wouldn't a Star Wars sandbox with all the physics stuff be fun to play around with? And yeah, it was very novel at the time. But, I picked up the 360 version, I played it. I never actually played through the Wii version, or I think it's been ported to everything under the sun.
Yeah.
But as we tried to get someone to play the Java version, but I don't think it exists anywhere left on the earth. So
Thankfully, we've scrubbed it.
Maybe the video game History Foundation can go find the Java version of The Force Unleashed.
They've been working on some of those organizations on preserving those phone games. So one can only hope that the immaculate Java version of The Force Unleashed will be saved. Jet, how about you?
Yeah, so I heard about this game actually years ago, around the time when Blockbuster was a thing, and my brother told me yo, well, we should try this game together. And at this point, I was not into Star Wars, didn't know anything, so I had no interest for that game. But then I discovered it again, like when it was in a humble bundle like years ago with all these other Star Wars games, and I thought, oh hey, yeah, I remember seeing this game, and then I tried a bit of it, and yeah, I thought like just anything in the Star Wars universe seemed cool at first.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Randy, how about you?
Yeah, so I guess real quick, I'm curious what everyone's interest level is in Star Wars in general. Jet
Ooh,
had
good
brought
point.
up that as a good point, because I'm curious, because that's going to inform my opinion, I think, as well.
All right. Well,
I'll go
I'll
back
start.
around the horn.
Yeah, I'll start there. I am a relatively big Star Wars fan. Not like as say like into it as like Grub is, going with audio novels and everything like that. I read a couple of books as a kid, but that's about it. Mostly it's just I enjoy the movies, I enjoy the games, I enjoy the lore of Star Wars, but that's, the extent of it for the most part. Yeah, how about everyone else? Just go down the line there. Dugan?
Repeat the question. I just jumped in.
Oh, we're just talking about like how we first came across this game and then our interest level in Star Wars to sort of like how that might have influenced how much we like this game or we're interested in picking it up.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've Star Wars. I'm far more on Jeff's side of things. Like I'm a pretty big Star Wars fan, but I also recognize it as camp, as popcorn. Something to watch with a bowl of popcorn in front of you, and the lore is also a lot of fun. Just kind of get lost in. But I recently had just seen the re-release of Return of the Jedi in theaters, and it was the CGI edition, the special edition, and realized just how campy this stuff is supposed to be, and maybe does not sit back in the theaters very well after some time. So no, it's definitely I'm a big fan, but recognizing it as camp and good camp.
Gotcha. Inu?
So I'm a pretty big Star Wars fan. I actually think I'm probably more of a fan of all the Star Wars games than the movies late. I've always I kind of came to it late. I think my first exposure to Star Wars was KOTOR. And so I kind of went through everything with KOTOR.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, so fairly big. So I've seen everything except for pretty much Andor and Book of Boba Fett now. But I've never really read any of the comics or any of the Star Killer expanded universe that has came out with this game too.
Fair enough. Jet, you a big Star Wars fan over there?
No, I'd say I'm pretty casual. Like I like the movies, and then I've watched some of The Mandalorian, but
Okay.
first off, like I feel like being a big Star Wars fan is a big time commitment because Disney released so many shows at once.
It's a lot of Disney properties nowadays, but I know what you mean. Matt, how about you give both of us there, both of them to us there. Where did you like first learn about this game? How'd you get into it? And then your Star Wars history there, a brief one.
Sure. I believe I first heard about the game probably on GameSpot or IGN. Probably GameSpot, if I'm being honest. Following that type of thing, GameSpot Giant Bomb. I don't know when exactly this was. It would have been wherever Jeff Gerstmann was at the time. Right. Them talking about it, and it looked interesting. My history with Star Wars was I was a huge Star Wars fan when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I literally wore out the tape on a couple on Empire and Jedi. Watching them so many times when I was a child, but as I grew up, I became much more of a Star Trek fan and kind of left the Star Wars behind. Not that it's bad, I just prefer the other thing. So yeah, that's where I came in.
Gotcha. Well, discussers, it seems that we have a newcomer to the fray. One Tall Kodo has joined the conversation. Mike, why don't you tell us how you first discovered this game and your history with the Star Wars franchise?
Do you know Eclipse is too hot to be a Star Wars?
Know it.
Yes, hi everybody. Sorry for my incredible tardiness. I have no excuse. But no, I got this game just back when it came out. I've been a moderate Star Wars fan pretty much my entire life. I've always been excited for sort of the big releases, and this was like the only big Star Wars video game for pretty much that generation, aside from Lego and Connect stuff that really mattered. So, I was definitely excited for it. I was into it. And I just kind of picked it up when it came out, and I played through it, the Xbox 360 version, pretty quickly. It was a very kind of popcorny game, right? You just kind of went through it. It was breezy. You had a good time, and maybe didn't think about it a whole lot after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. I believe Randy, you should be up next. So you want to tell us about your love of Star Wars or lack thereof?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a love or a hate. It's just kind of a there. I mean, I can kind of judge each property on its own merits. I like some of the movies. I like some of the games. The Star Wars universe itself is not enough to bring me to the yard, as it were. It's fine. I've got no problems with it. But as a result, since it doesn't draw me there just by the nature of it being the universe, when the game came out and had middling, I would borderline say negative reviews, I avoided it entirely. I just didn't even touch it until this is the first time I am putting hands on this thing and even seeing it. Really, I don't even remember looking at it that much. So I went in super duper fresh on this thing.
All right, there's something that I want to put a pin on there that Randy said, but before we get to that, Jedi Wolf, as you are going as tonight, you haven't had a chance to say either. So yeah, how did you stumble across this game, and what's your history with Star Wars, briefly?
I guess briefly, I'm not really the biggest Star Wars fan. I've always thought the world building of Star Wars was really cool, but I never really liked the movies that much. I only watched the first two and thought they were fine. But just in general, I grew up with the Clone Wars TV show, but even then I never finished it. So I'm a very passing interest with Star Wars. I love the games, and like I said, I love the universe, but the actual series I don't really have that much infatuation for. As for this game, I remember watching a lot of YouTube videos about it around the early 2010s, how it's kind of one of the better Star Wars games, and I've always had a passing interest in it, but I've never really kind of took the deep dive into it. So I thought this game club was the perfect opportunity for me to finally give it a shot, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Very nice, very nice. Very much showing your age there a bit, Wolf. Growing up with the Clone Wars TV show. But
hey, man, all right, that doesn't mean I don't have an opinion.
Of course not. Of course not. Some of us are on the younger side of things. That's all well and good. And then I see
I'm too old for this.
Yeah, you're getting too old for it. Yeah.
I'll be saying I'm getting too old for this sort of thing. Something like that.
Oh, you tell me. Where's Grub? Grub's the big Star Wars guy. How would we not have him in?
Oh, Grub's a Star Wars guy. I don't think he has any love for unleashing Force.
No, he does not. We talked about this game. Spoiler: he did not think highly of it from what he has played. And then, real quick, Jedi, if you want to get in there, where did you first find this game, and are you a Star Wars fanatic or not?
Hey, so yeah, I am do consider myself a big Star Wars fan. I've watched all the movies. I love the usual ones, the ones that people really like the most. Then as far as this game, yeah, I played it when it initially came out on the 360. I think my response was pretty much the same as everyone else's. It was a solid 7 out of 10. It didn't blow me away, but it also wasn't terrible either. It was a pretty good time. And so I was just kind of curious of, this game that was going to have these crazy force abilities that you were going to be able to use. And that's not really something that they had really done before. So I was just really curious to see how they did that. I thought it was okay for the most part.
Okay, gotcha. Real quick, everyone just go off mute here for a second. I want to know. Just say I if you played the PC 360 PS3 version for this discussion.
I.
Okay, most people actually. Did anyone besides Mike play the Switch Wii PS2 version?
Really?
Interesting. Okay.
I thought more people would play it just because it seems easier to get a hold of these days, to be honest.
For what's worth, Mike, I did get as far into the Switch version as I did the PC version. So about 3 levels after the.
Well, I'm glad that you're the one leading this conversation then. Fantastic.
Hey, if someone was awake on time, maybe he would be leading.
Thank you,
But
Sean.
Randy said something that I wanted to address, which is just the overarching feelings about this game. So I actually did go back and look at the Metacritic, and it's interesting because it is very mixed. Anyone who's looked at that or has thought of, or even saw the reviews back in the day knows that it is a very mixed reception game. I noticed that it's very high to very low. And you have a lot of people up top, which are, a variety of sites, including some bigger ones, including some smaller ones. But I noticed a lot of the, shall we say, more reputable magazines and whatnot of the day didn't care for it as much. But no one, hated it, really. It was all just either, hey, finally, we get to use the Force. This is great. I love this game. Or, man, I'm not really feeling this as an action game. So it was a range there, and I want to go from there just right into talking about the main points of a character action game, because that's what this is. This is a God of War, a DMC, something along those lines, released around the same time, not too far off, within a year of Bayonetta. We were sort of in that era of the PS3, the 360. So to start off, I wanted to talk about the combat, because that's the most important thing about an action game. And this is a Star Wars game. We can talk a little about the story and everything, but I want to talk about the gameplay first and foremost, because this is something that I feel is the downfall of this game, regardless of the quality of what you feel about it. I think everyone can admit the game has flaws gameplay wise. Personally, I actually, before doing this, I was doing a stream of a variety of action games, because I sort of wanted to get a fresh perspective, a refreshed perspective of games that I played, but also a fresh one from ones I haven't. I've never played God of War 2 before, the PS2 original. And so I checked that out on stream, and I wanted to get a feel of what things were like both at the time, where we've come, because that will influence people's opinions on things. And so me personally, I feel like this game has a bit of knife through butter syndrome, where there's a little bit of your character swinging the weapon and it not quite feeling hefty and not quite feeling that there's a certain weight to it that I would expect out of a game like this. And maybe that's why I didn't like it as much. And I feel like that's at odds with the Force powers, which clearly they want you to use a lot, but have a variety of usefulness and a variety of quality, I would say, to them. Why don't we just start going down the line? Randy, you had something to say on this?
If we're just sticking to the combat, I had a lot of issues with that as well. I agree wholeheartedly with the knife through butter thing. I think it goes beyond that in the sense that a lot of the fodder enemies even just take too many hits to kill. I upgraded my lightsaber all the way, and it wouldn't, one combo wouldn't knock out the weakest of enemies. It would make them go flying, which was frustrating because then I had to go run after them. It didn't feel like there was a really elegant way to close the distance or fight anyone from the range from a distance. I also didn't feel like the Force powers felt great. I was fiddling around with them a bunch. I didn't really gel with that in a way that I felt gave me an advantage. So I kind of just stuck to the shield and the lightning because those were the only ones that I feel reliably worked. And when it is working as intended, it just feels pretty unremarkable. That's kind of, it was boring. And then when it wasn't working as intended, which is, other parts of the gameplay that I feel like I ran into a fair amount of glitches in that, but also just from being stun locked by enemies and getting knocked over and juggled around. And it's just what, my goodness, I'm supposed to be this powerful Jedi guy, and this one stormtrooper with a flash grenade keeps knocking me over nonstop, and it's ridiculous. And yeah, I never really gelled with the combat and the quick time events, which in God of War, they're lifted directly out of God of War.
Right.
In here, I think it does not click because I'll be in the middle of a combo and then suddenly I'll be in a quick time event without even realizing it, and I'll fail the quick time event and I'll have to start fighting them over again. God of War kind of snaps them into place a little bit right before they're ready for a quick time event. So they have a giant icon of okay, you are ready to quick time event this enemy, go for it. And it just doesn't feel polished or good even when it's working as intended.
Gotcha. That locking into place thing is definitely something I want to address in a second, but I think we have more to say on the raw combat experience itself. Me and Randy, sort of on the negative side of things. So how about we have a more positive outlook? Wolf, I know you were a big fan of this game. You really enjoyed it. Why don't you tell us what you thought about the combat and things related to it, the force powers and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say I definitely respect y'all's take. I understand a lot of your criticisms about it, but I guess like to me that knife through butter thing is an interesting analogy because that's actually kind of the reason I really liked the combat was just everything felt so speedy and quick. Like I felt like I was just jumping around, going for like jump and strike attacks. I'm a big fan of force lightning. That was pretty much the thing that made this game really fun for me was just going into a battle, jumping in, slicing people with my lightsaber, jumping in like a madman, pressing jump like my life depends on it, basically, spamming force lightning. It's just that kind of it's the speed of the combat that really hit for me. And you know, I'm a big fan of action games too, just like you, Sean. And
Right.
I guess like it felt like a different kind of action game, and in no way am I saying this is like the level of like a God of War 2 or a Devil May Cry. But, you know, Dugan said earlier, I know he also defended this game, and he said it perfectly, where it's like campy and fun, just like Star Wars, and I fully 100% agree with him there.
Okay, fair enough. Well, speaking of game comparisons, I know that Mike Minotti thinks that this game is on the same level of Devil May Cry 5 based on the way he rates games. So, Mike, why don't you tell us what you thought about the combat?
Yeah, that's actually about right. I mean, I'm not a giant Devil May Cry 5 guy. I think it's okay. I think this game is okay. Both versions of it. I played that original back then. I remember thinking, yeah, this is like a breezy, okay God of War clone that has basically the gravity gun from Half-Life 2 in it. It's like everyone got excited about physics engines. I thought they kind of made that stuff work fun here, almost to the detriment of the lightsaber combat because that is relatively whatever, and actually just picking up people and throwing them around works better and also often does more damage. So I would actually focus on stuff like that and the lightning force powers, and even the Wii version that I played on Switch. I was actually shocked that that force stuff was still there. Like you still had all that gravity stuff, and that felt good. So I was still mostly doing that and force lightning. The melee combat was simplified. Like it doesn't have it's just one attack button. It basically because of course back in the day it was designed for waggle.
It's one on 360 as well.
It is okay. That's interesting, man. I forgot about that. Then I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I was surprised too because I could have sworn there was light and heavy, but no, it's attack and delay, which to be fair is basically what DMC did as well.
That's fine. Yeah, honestly, like I don't really mind that necessarily, but it is the lightsaber combat is kind of whatever compared to the physics stuff, and even in the 360 version, you have destruction stuff. You don't really have that much of that in the Wii version.
Right.
But yeah, I think the combat is the force power stuff is kind of fun. The lightsaber stuff is whatever. The game is weird because it's sandwiched between these two other franchises that do this sort of thing better. The kind of Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, Jedi Outcast series before this, and then the Jedi Fallen Order series after it. I think both sort of do their spins on this kind of thing differently. The one thing that this series does have is the sort of fun, like Havoc physics engine based force pushing stuff.
And if anyone else wants to jump in, by the way, just make sure to go off mute and I'll get you in here. Inu, you want to hop in right away there?
So my biggest problem with the combat is really when it comes to the boss battles, because it does not telegraph or tell you. It has zero tells on the bosses what you're supposed to, what powers you're supposed to use at what point for what enemies. So half the time you're just guessing, and then you've got half health, and like it's hard to compare this to like a Devil May Cry where like all that stuff is easily telegraphed. The game's very good about using its own language to tell you what you're supposed to do. And I mean, this game came out 6 months after Devil May Cry 4, which I think I don't even think it's a fair comparison. I mean, the combat in that game, even though that game has its own backtracking issues, but it doesn't compare. And that's my real issue, is that it doesn't really know if it wants to go all in on its lightsaber combat or if it wants you to just use its physics stuff all of the time. And they just had an issue where they couldn't quite figure out, like, right, how much are we going to go on this lightsaber combat, because none of the combos really feel like you really need to use them. because like I said, all the enemies just die in like 2 hits. So you don't really need to do anything more than really force lightning. So like, why would you need to engage in any of the combos, like in even the harder difficulties?
Right.
That was kind of my big just complaint, is that there's like hardly any hits done, or you just get forced stun locked, or you just randomly fall off the edges.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a super fun bug on the PC version where if you use the mod to get rid of the 30 frames cap,
Affects the physics.
it affects the physics in all kinds of fun ways,
Yep.
and especially if you let it go uncapped frame rate. When you grab a person with force, they just instantly start going faster up into the sky. And if you don't throw them fast enough, it will crash the game.
Wow.
60 FPS on Switch.
So that was half of the fun, was just watching, the game just kind of destroy itself with the physics on the PC version, because it didn't know what to do.
You do bring up something that was kind of an issue for me, which was there seem to be correct answers in a lot of situations, except for the bosses, like you mentioned, which don't have a ton of, at least in the 360 version, there aren't a lot of telegraph moves or anything, like moments where you can get in and counter hit whatnot. That's a little bit difficult, but otherwise there is that, well, why would I do anything else of like the force lightning and even the force push, pushing enemies over an edge, which is always fun, but it's like, well, why is the lightsaber combat here at all? If you clearly want me to use my force powers left, it's the Force Unleashed, it's there in the title. So I feel like, I'm sure they didn't put a complete back burner approach to the combat of the lightsaber. They couldn't have. They put so much effort into like the combos and everything. At the very least in the 360 version. I know the Wii one was simpler, but that's because it has its own thing where the wiggle waggle and the Wii and the Switch version later on. So there is a bit of, I feel, misguidedness about the combat as a whole, where they didn't really take into account what makes a good action game, which is what this game is. It's where it settles into the whole gaming landscape. And I wish they would have looked a little more at what other people are doing and known, oh, we need to let's put a little camera shake on this, and then have Starkiller sort of like feel like there's a little bit of weight behind that swing. Something I noticed when I was playing DMC5, which is, not a fair comparison. It came way later, but DMC games before did it to an extent as well, where your character moves very quickly, but then the attacks are weighted and it feels like there's a heft behind your character swinging their weapon. I know it's not going to be the same with a lightsaber, but even in Star Wars lore, there is, there's samurai. They do things a little more deliberately. And it's one of the things that I like about Jedi Fallen Order is that you have this apprentice, like the apprentice of Starkiller, who is sort of learning what they're doing, and so the combat is a little slower. It's that more Souls-like combat that people have been comparing it to. And then the other side of things, I know I at least like Star Wars Battlefront 2, the original Battlefront 2, which does just make you feel like a badass, but it makes you feel like a badass on a battlefield where slicing through enemies kind of makes sense. I feel like here it does feel a little off, the approach that they went with. Dugan, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, I think to Mike's point earlier, this was sandwiched between Jedi Knight and now I've got the Star Wars Jedi : whatever series.
Right.
That I think that this game walks so those games, the Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order could run. And I think that, as much as it's not about the one-to-one encounter, you need some Dark Souls in there to make it that really heavy one-to-one combat.
Right.
But this game is, you're kind of fighting against the environment. Playing through it was like, you got to think, like you said, it's almost like environmental puzzles of how to get from A to B,
Right.
which I thought was more interesting than anything else. And, got to remember, these are also kind of reminiscent of the Power of the Force line of Star Wars, which is like an early mid late 90s toy run where you've got the swole Luke Skywalker toy, and that's what I think it was going for, and I think it did achieve that to some end, because you got to play with action figures and smash them against each other pretty well.
Gotcha. Matt, was there something that you wanted to add on to this?
Yeah, since I remember playing this when it first came out, and thinking the combat was just kind of fine, I ended up throwing it on easy, and I just actually had a ton of fun just force powering my way through everything. It actually makes the game, I think, a lot better, honestly, because yeah, the lightsaber just doesn't have a great feel. I don't know if any Jedi Academy still probably has the best lightsaber. But you have to learn so much to actually use it correctly. But yeah, I don't know. It was fun just throwing people around and force powering my way through on easy in general.
Fair enough. Which, hey, nothing wrong with knocking it down a difficulty level if you want to make it a more breezy experience. We definitely embrace that around here. Jedi, how about you?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo his sentiments. I definitely was one that played it on one of the easier difficulties. I think it's a very good kind of turn your brain off type of game.
Along the lines of like a Muso or something, maybe.
Yeah, it kind of feels more like that. Because I mean, the Muso games don't really have a great, feel when it comes to the action combat.
True.
So it's interesting to bring that up as a comparison, because I definitely feel like 2 is. I think their problem they ran into is, well, we want to be able to use these powerful force powers, right? But also, like, you can't really have like a Jedi be your character and not use the lightsaber. Most people would just find that weird if they didn't have a lightsaber. And so I felt like they were caught between, well, do we make some type of lightsaber combat system, or do we try to focus on the force powers? And in the end, it definitely leans more towards the force powers, because those are definitely more interesting to use than the lightsaber combat.
Right. All right. Well, I think that unless Randy, you want to get in here on something?
Nah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that pretty much covers the bulk of the combat. Just so this conversation isn't heavily weighted in one direction or the other. Let's explore some other stuff. The story, which typically in a character action game wouldn't really be all that relevant or necessary to talk about, but this is Star Wars. It's the IP that we all know and love, and so its place in the timeline at the time before things got reset, retconned, whatever you want to call it, this was, canon. This was a Star Wars story that they were bringing to the front for people to check out. So I'm wondering what everyone thought about the story. Mike, why don't you hit us with your thoughts on your pilot friend and everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because I remember it was a big kind of selling point at the time was how important this story was going to be. In some ways, that's almost a little forced and a little too cute, especially at the end, where it's like, this guy's family crest is going to become our symbol, and it's that Rebel Alliance symbol. That's very heavy-handed. Right, like, okay, whatever. But, it was kind of fun. There's some likable characters. I like that sort of Jedi mentor guy, sort of down and out and, out in his luck. They kind of have a fun time bringing back some characters from like the prequel era that we're not used to seeing in this more original trilogy era, like Shaak Ti and her obviously going to be tempted by the dark side apprentice. I like the droid a lot, actually. In fact, one of my biggest complaints with the Switch version, aka that Wii PlayStation 2 version, is that they cut out the whole point of his character, which is that Darth Vader programmed him to try to constantly kill Starkiller.
Yeah.
So he's like a training robot, right? And that was fun. That was just gone in the Switch version.
That pays off. That pays off in the F360 version.
It pays off amazingly. The best moment of the game where he's like, oh, I've been saving this one. He turns into Darth Maul. And it's like, oh, they actually found kind of a cool way to justify having a Darth Maul boss battle in this game. That's pretty neat. So yeah, missing that in the Switch version. And instead of that, in that version, you get this weird thing where you keep going back to the Jedi Temple like multiple times to fight OC bosses. It doesn't quite hit the same way. But yes, I think the story is okay. Again, a little too cute. And I know it's a joke. I do find Juno Eclipse looking like a UK like fashion model a little distracting and weird, but whatever. I mean, the her choice of attire in the later half of the game also distracting. And look, I feel grossed out too. I'm like, she can't wear that. But it's a lot.
It's a bit much. It's a bit much. That second outfit, like I said, that's a bit much. Yes, it is. But again, very of the time, right? Wolf, you got something to add to the Star Warsy-ness of this?
Yeah, I thought the story was really fun. I mean, like, yeah, it's not peak fiction or anything, but like, I thought it was like a pretty enjoyable tale from beginning to end. Like, I thought Starkiller was a very interesting character. I thought his backstory was pretty fascinating. The idea of him like training with Vader and then having to slowly shift over to the good side. At first, I was a little bothered because I really wanted to play as a Sith Lord, but at the same time, like, I saw where the story was going, and I thought it actually fit for his character. Yeah, the romance felt very basic and kind of just felt like we wanted a romance, so we just kind of threw one in there. But like, I do think like the whole like struggle between Starkiller and Vader was pretty interesting. So, and I remember seeing a meme of the cutscene where Vader says, "I lied," and I was just
Yeah.
excited the whole time to see that scene. If I'm being honest.
With that delivery too. I lied.
Lied.
He's almost happy about it. It's very funny. Randy, did you have something you want to dive more in depth here on that one?
I don't know about in depth necessarily. Mike said that the story was okay. I would even go as far as say it is surprisingly okay.
Mhm.
Like my expectations were rock bottom, and I guess that's the beauty about having very low expectations. Again, the reviews clouded
Sure.
that, but the conversations were not. This word is overused, but I would not say they are cringy, even by today's standards. The humor was actually there. I thought that it was earned in a lot of cases. The romance, I didn't see that coming. Like when they kissed at the end, I'm like, what?
Really?
I don't know why. I just didn't get a vibe that they were being. I don't know. I just thought they were bros. I don't know. That didn't land for me. But what they were trying to do, I don't think it all hit, but I thought it was all right. Like there was some good stuff in there. It went off the rails at the end. It got sloppy, and people were saying it was heavy-handed. I tend to agree, but for the most part, whenever there was a cutscene, I was not offended, which is strange.
Better than you could have asked for, I suppose.
Yes.
Jedi, how about you?
Yeah, so yeah, I mostly agree about with the story in that yeah, it very much feels like a George Lucas prequel level writing, right? It kind of has a lot of the heavy-handedness that you would
Interesting
expect from a George
statement.
Lucas project. And I think I remember reading somewhere I think they did consult him a bit for the story. I think he had some involvement in some of the story for this game.
I remember
So that was
yeah.
kind of interesting. And so yeah, it's heavy-handed. Like, oh yeah, the guy's crest is going to be the Rebel Alliance crest. Like, okay. I did actually like Vader's personality in that Vader is always someone who's like the stooge at a corporation, always angry to get his boss's job, and that's basically what they made this game around, which I thought was very funny and interesting.
Right. Inu, did you have something you want to interject there?
Yeah, I just kind of found it fun how Starkiller kind of spoils at the end of the game, just whoops Vader's ass after it seems like he just studied the Force for about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my favorite part of the story. I mean, it sounded like they had some more interesting things cooking for the second game, but that second game really got rushed out the door, and like LucasArts was just like, nope, more Starkiller, all Starkiller. That's all we want. Because I guess the original plot was for Shaak Ti's apprentice to be the main character of the second game, and they had a bunch of cool stuff cooking for that, but then that kind of got scrapped, kind of as LucasArts died. But the story was surprisingly fine, and yeah, I guess a lot of it did have to get run by George Lucas, and I guess a lot of it was on the cusp of like, all right, what do we accept as being close enough and in canon at the time before we're gonna kind of chuck it out when Disney took it back over. But yeah, they had another. They were. I was watching. I think Matt McMuscles had a video on the second one, and they had a lot of ideas for. I can't remember. They had some really dumb names for Starkiller's original name.
To be fair, so did Luke back in the day, including Starkiller, if I'm not mistaken. So sort of a brand there. Dugan, how about we get you in here, and then I'll get to the tech submissions here.
Oh yeah, sure. No, I just realized, just sudden realization, that Star Wars relies on Bond girls more than Bond does now, it seems like, back in the day especially. And I feel like Juno Eclipse was just Lucas's way, if he was consulted, to be like, you're never getting Mara Jade, this is the closest you're going to get to Luke's wife. But no, I think, the story-wise, again, I go back to it was less about the story for me and more about the environments. Like they actually told some interesting and expanded some interesting parts of the lore. Like we saw a bull rancor at one point. You know, these are kind of things that are just like so ridiculously niche Star Wars in some, you know, role playing game that we actually got and to play with and have that toy come to life. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I wasn't really there for the story, but you know, I thought that was cool to expand the Star Wars lore and see that in the version we got it.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think between the two sides that we've definitely covered the bulk of the game here. So since we're running a little low on time, I'm going to lightning around the text submissions that people put in the Discord for us. Then we can start wrapping things up a little and sort of melding some of our thoughts together there in the closing statements then. From Crabstinence, hello, casual here. Oh, we knew. I never actually played the game, but I would like to take this opportunity to declare my hatred of sand. I hear it is coarse and gets everywhere, so that's fair, casual. On a more serious note, Chronobound has submitted, The Force Unleashed is a disappointing but mercifully short game, which I think is what some people have been saying in the chat throughout the month. I rented the game on 360 shortly after it came out. The promise of a new action game with full force powers almost a decade after Jedi Outcast, along with destruction physics with bombastic set pieces, was too enticing to ignore. The 360 version looks and controls well enough. The game is far too linear and restricted to its own good, though. The game really likes instant death pitfalls seemingly to help since the rest of the game was not challenging. I've never been the biggest Star Wars fan, Episode 1 Racer excluded from that, but story-wise, there's nothing to write home about. While normally I wouldn't be so frustrated at such a middling game, I encountered a game-ruining bug. The final boss would occasionally cast a Force Lightning, protecting them for a small time while he levitates, sending minions to fight. Unfortunately, almost every time the shield was cast, the game would not deactivate the shield, making the boss land and stay invincible. As such, it took me well over a dozen frustrating attempts to beat the final boss. I only succeeded because the boss just fell through the stage. Well, there you go. Overall, it's a mediocre game with some bugs that didn't live up to its potential and completely fell apart at the end. So a little more negative there from Chronobound. I think a certain someone here might be a little more positive. We have Beef Hammer coming in. Sean attempted to silence my opinions being shared by making me too busy tonight to come talk, even though I might be in chat. Hi, Beef. He wrote that. I did not say that. But I must bring my thoughts as I am the expert here. I played the 360 version of the game probably 7 times. It was one of the only single-player games I had as a kid. Is there a higher stamp of approval for a game than being played several times by me? I don't think so. Most game devs think that's a bigger accolade than GOTY. They're all looking for that Beef Hammer stamp, Mike. I don't know what you're talking about. But I am here today as the DS version expert. See, this man's insane. I actually did beat the DS version. I refuse to beat stuff like Mario 64. I just need to pause because I'm flabbergasted by that. But I made certain to see the credits for this crap. First of all, it's a 3D game on the DS and it looks bad. Holy hell, does it look bad. I guess props for doing it, but why? Worse is the controls. You use the D-pad to move, and the screen is split into 7 buttons you press to do moves. No other buttons on the DS are used, which is as bad as it sounds. The idea seemed to be that you would do combos by drawing a line to connect moves. Jesus. Unfortunately, that feels about as satisfying as the whole romance plot in the game. Speaking of which, it's essentially a stripped-down version of the full game, so I get all the same beats and levels, just bare bones. Levels are like 10 to 15 minutes long. Don't get Proxy's side story of killing me, and I missed out on the excellent characterization of Juno and Starkiller. I hope that's sarcasm. It's a toss-up, but I think people will live if they skip this version. But I still recommend the main version, as has some charm to it, even though it's mostly just okay. Well, thank you to the DS version expert Beef Hammer for writing in tonight. You did what none of us could. Anyways, like I said, we're running a little short on time, so we are just going to move right along to our closing thoughts. I'm just going to go down the line, so get ready there, Dugan. I'm just wondering what everyone thought about the game as a whole, and if you have anything last things you want to interject here as we're wrapping up. So, Dugan, what do you have for us?
Thank you, Fearless Leader, for taking us where no one would to lead this without Mike there to get us started. I appreciate that to begin with. But truly, I thought this game is fine. It's fun, really. I think it's worth it. It's one of those games where you pick up once and you end up replaying it a couple times. And does the service of the Star Wars universe that was ready for the time. And again, I think the game is more about playing in the sandboxes with the toys, which was much like, to me, this is equal to the Book of Boba Fett.
Gotcha.
Will I watch it 1,000 times? No, but I will enjoy it, and I'll enjoy watching a Rancor be rid upon and beaten up by a lightsaber.
Fair enough, I think. Inu, hit me. Quick thoughts. What you got?
So I think the game was kind of a 7 out of 10 when it came out in 2008, and I don't think it's aged much better than then. But it's even all said, I think it's short enough that you can breeze through it, and it's still a fairly fun time. Just put it through easy and play through. I just want to point out that the coolest scene of the game, where you have to use force powers to pull down the Star Destroyer, completely gets ruined when you have to swat those stupid TIE fighters out of the way every 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That scene could have been so much cooler, and that's the end of that.
Gotcha. Jet, how about you? You have anything you want to add in at the end here?
Yeah, actually, mostly just a quick question, because I can't really give too many opinions about the game. Do you think it like set up anything for Fallen Order in terms of like did they take inspiration from the combat or anything like
Not really, since this is such a like God of War clone. I think if anything, future Star Wars games would look back and say, simply as a whole, all of the games to come before, how can we improve lightsaber fighting? Because that was definitely the weakest element of the combat here. All right, Jedi, would you like to add some?
Just some couple of final thoughts. It's just, yep, my original time I played it, it was about a 7 out of 10, and I think it's still a 7 out of 10. Although I will say I do think it has suffered somewhat in light of the fact that, you know, we do have the Jedi games, which are far superior. And like, I'm playing through Jedi Survivor right now, and, you know, obviously it's just a much better, much polished game. So I think that's the only real problem I think now today with the game, is that there are just better Star Wars games now. Like even among some of the older games that, you know, around the time it came out, there are probably still better Star Wars games to play. But yeah, it's still probably like it's a solid 7-ish out of 10. Well, you'll enjoy it if you play it once.
Gotcha. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, it's a fun little romp on easy that you can just kind of breeze through and not think too much about, but nothing special.
All right, fair enough. Randy?
Yeah, Sean, since you're hosting it, I kind of feel like the cynic here. I kind of expect, I'm usually the optimistic one, and there is no aspect of this game that I enjoyed playing. I would have really have just enjoyed doing just about anything else. I thought the story was surprisingly okay, but other than that, there really was not too much redeemable about this thing. I got really frustrated in a lot of ways. I am envious of the people that were able to turn their brain off and cut their way through, but when I started getting juggled around by those stupid grenades, like I'm just like, okay, well, now I can't even progress.
Right.
And I didn't enjoy fighting, so I just kind of ran by everything, and that worked like 90% of the time. So it just doesn't. People say 7 out of 10, and to an extent, I agree. I mean, I've definitely played games that we would consider 7 out of 10s that have aged worse than this, but I don't know if there's a 7 out of 10 game I would rather play a different 7 out of 10 game. I guess I just didn't find really any enjoyment out of this whatsoever.
Right. Well, I'm simply trying to be somewhat of a mediator tonight as the host, but don't worry. Since I'm taking over Mike's role, I do get final word tonight. He. Wolf, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've clearly seen myself as the biggest fan. I'm not like a super fan of this game. I just want to point that out, guys. All right, like, this is like a 7 out of 10. I agree with everyone else. I do think I am very high on this game compared to a lot of people. I think the age thing, I don't know if it's aged as badly as a lot of other people seem to say, but of course, like, different opinions, and I respect all of those. I just think that this game was overall just a really fun romp. It's short. I think I'd highly recommend it to anyone, but I would never say that its combat is on the same level of DMC5. So that's all I'll say.
Well, speaking of which, Mike.
It's fine. Both home console versions are fine. I play through both of them relatively quickly. One thing I didn't say about the Switch version, it's funny, I don't know if this is true in the 360, how much you can kind of just run past the game. Every once in a while, it's like you must stop and kill this many enemies. Otherwise, you just kind of run, and he could beat the game in like 4 or 5 hours, so that's nice.
It's similar
Yeah,
in 360. I did notice it's easier to do that in Wii, but it's
very
similar.
easy to do that in the Switch version. Yeah, it's an okay romp. It's the kind of game I forget about pretty quickly. Better Star Wars games. It's not even sniffing my top 10 list of best Star Wars games. But it's, there's always some people who still do remember it. It has some fun ideas in there, like the kind of gravity-based force stuff. But other games do that better.
Right. All right, yeah, and I am going to give my thoughts as the final thoughts here. I did try to hold my tongue a little bit as a mediator because I wanted to be a good host tonight, but yeah, I hate this game. I think this game sucks. I think reviewers need to use more of the spectrum when reviewing games. I thought this game was bad, and so I give it a 4 out of 10. From what I played, again, before you get your pitchforks out, from what I played and what I've seen, my personal opinion is that's a 4. I thought it was bad.
4 out of 10? Come on, it's no Redfall.
Dang. Going with the same joke as 20% of the chat. Thank you, Mike. But yeah, just as a big character action game fan, it did not click with me because it does not have the polish that a lot of those have. I thought the combat just was no good. I thought the story was not good even for Star Wars, which I say even as a Star Wars fan, kind of hokey a lot of the time. We didn't really talk about this too much, but the two versions of the game are actually quite a bit different. I think the Wii version has aged a bit better because it's less ambitious. I think that's a little bit better, more of like a 5 out of 10 range, just, a mediocre. It's okay, it's whatever. We sort of talked about Muso in a shut your brain off kind of game. There you go. I think that's what this can be if you want to, but it's just so fundamentally flawed in so many different ways that I didn't find myself enjoying it. But as you heard from everyone tonight, we have a variety of opinions, and some people did like it. So if their opinions align with yours on other games, hey, maybe you'll enjoy it too. All I know is at the end of the day, hey, opinions are cool, and we can all have them. So that's going to do it for tonight's Game Club discussion. Thank you for joining us on May the 4th, Star Wars Day. This month, May of 2023, we are doing something very special. For the first time ever, we are doing a brand new game for Game Club. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom will be our discussion at the end of the month. So hey, if you enjoyed this discussion, first of all, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. But also, if you want to get in on this discussion, like everyone who was talking tonight, you can hit up the Patreon, patreon.com/GameMess, and get in, talk with us, chat in the text channels throughout the month, and have a good time. But until next time, we'll be seeing you. Take care.